Hello there, Salem and Kaiser, and welcome to another edition of Gray Matters. Not quite gray these days. But anyway, this is a political election year for president and other offices, and we have with us, not a candidate for president quite, Bill Dalton here from Long Island, but we're going to be talking about what goes into the life and psyche of somebody who commits to run for office. Bill had the dubious honor of aspiring to the State Legislature, House of Representatives. He almost made it, but not quite, and not quite isn't good enough. But he had some very insightful, marvelous experiences going door to door. So we're going to find out what goes into the essence of a political soul. Welcome aboard.
Lee, thanks. It's good to be here.
Now,
good to see you again.
Go ahead. Speak.
I was just going to say, the fork in hand, that's
Yes.
worse
Okay.
than I
We're
came
getting
across.
at the meat and potato issues. So that's what this fork is all about. And we're going to not eat crow as the result. There we go. That's the tie-in. Anyway, you were born in a place called Long Island, called Long Island by natives.
Yeah.
And it's the South Shore, not too far from Jones Beach,
Right.
in that area.
Right.
And you grew up there. It was sort of a suburban of New York City. What was it like then?
Well, it was interesting because, as you're probably aware from your own history, Long Island at one time was very rural.
Mm-hmm.
It started out as one of the original suburbs of the country, if you will.
Yes, indeed.
And I lived right across the city line in a very small town. And though I was within almost walking distance of formerly New York City.
Queens.
Of Queens, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I actually grew up in a very small town, and in talking about the things that have impacted me and the things that have had an influence on me, including politically, value-wise, I think growing up in a small town was a big part of that.
What was it called?
It was Gibson, which was a part of Valley Stream,
Valley Stream, yeah.
but it was like a suburb of a suburb.
Yeah. These days, in case you haven't been out there lately, Valley Stream has a place called Green Acres, a gigantic shopping center that is the magnet for shoppers and their wallets for the whole area.
Green Acres was actually one of the first so-called shopping centers in the United States.
Didn't know that.
And my interesting early experience when I was in elementary school was riding my bike over and picking up the empty bottles, soda bottles, from the construction being done at Green Acres.
Wow.
And that's how I got some of my pocket change when I was a youngster.
Good.
So.
What motivated you to go from Long Island to Oregon, not necessarily in one leap?
Well, yeah, it was the stepping stone that brought me out here. As you're aware, I went to Antioch College
In Ohio.
and probably, going back to the issue of politics and values, I think Antioch probably was the most formative, singly, identifiable experience in my life. The emphasis there on transparency, on honesty, had an honor system, and I can attest to the fact it worked very well because we had take-home exams, including in calculus. In my first round with calculus, I got a D. So obviously I
D
kept...
for dynamic.
Yeah, I tried to convince them of that.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was quite something to be on a campus where the entire student body was given the responsibility right from the get-go, right from the freshman year, to basically help make the rules that guided the college. And I was on the community council.
It's like a student council.
Which was a student council, except it was a governance body rather than an advisory body. So the students had a major part in making the laws, and then the students were responsible for self-enforcement.
Okay. Let me go back to flashback time. What, at that period, was some of the big issues that the community council tackled? What do you remember as being some of the... Well, you didn't necessarily fight the administration. You had to persuade them also, I guess.
Well, it was interesting because there wasn't a sense of really fighting the administration, which is very different than a lot of people's recollections.
Co-opt the administration.
Well, not even that.
Oh.
It was like the administration was there to sort of encourage us. I mean,
Partnership.
there was a dynamic, yes, it was a dynamic dialogue. It was a partnership. There were a
Issues?
number of issues that I remember. It had to do with women in the dormitories, how late they could stay, if there should be any
Which
rules or
dormitory were they hanging
regulations.
out in?
Well, all over. I mean, all of the campus dorms, in essence, were
Oh.
open to both sexes,
Oh.
not in terms of
Open
staying
door
there.
policy. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Open door policy. And so the issue was constraints, if any, on that. It was a time when marijuana was a very controversial issue. And so drugs on campus was an issue, but it wasn't really a question of using or not using. It was a question of being responsible in terms of the use of drugs.
Not let it
Happily,
become
most of them were
addictive.
recreational.
You're not let it become addictive to control your life.
Yeah, and you know, you had responsibility for your fellow students. If you saw somebody that you thought was getting in trouble because of overuse of drugs.
You gave me an idea with the new marijuana allowable law in the state. Maybe 3, 4, 6 months down the line, maybe we should have a panel here about how it's worked out here in Salem.
I think that'd be interesting.
Okay.
Be
We
very
won't have any
interesting.
smoking in the studio.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So it was
We'll
things
we-
like
we'll-
that
We'll
were
weed them out.
it was things like that were you know, very interesting, very challenging. What do you do?
What were some of the? I remember very distinctly, and it was in a different part of Iowa, Kent State, and the shooting, and the Vietnam protests, and all, and some.
Yellow Springs was the site of one of the major civil rights disputes. It was the Gegner case. It was a local barber who refused to cut the hair of African Americans.
I did not know anything about that.
And Yellow Springs, we were right between, almost halfway between Cincinnati, which was the site of the federal courthouse, and Columbus, which was the capital. And so we sort of alternated, a lot of the students sort of alternated in terms of which place they spent their weekends marching. It was very activist, and I think, again, that goes back to your original question. There was an intense focus on responsible activism at Antioch. In fact, our founding father, Horace Mann, educator from Massachusetts,
Oh, yes.
left one of the most important legacies at Antioch, which was a statement of "Be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity." And I think everybody who graduates from Antioch, I certainly did,
Sure.
walks out sort of with that branded on their soul as well as their forehead.
Yes, Bill. If my memory is correct, and you could correct me, I think Horace Mann was known as a champion of public education.
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
not everybody out there remembers their grade school lessons.
Yeah. Well, he
Somehow I
became,
do, I don't know.
He became the first president of Antioch. That was 1854, 55.
Before your time.
A few years before my time. Yeah, I just missed him.
Well, yeah. Okay.
But he left quite a legacy, and Antioch is one of the finest legacies that he left. He left both an East Coast legacy and a Midwest legacy.
Okay, let's go not so fast forward. Now, beyond your college years at Antioch, you became interested in current events and social issues. How did that play out in terms of your involvement? Did you be part of an organization that was protesting or petitioning or anything like that? What were some of the causes that follow your stepping stones of political maturity?
It's an interesting question because the stepping stones, in some case, for me, I think were a bit more subtle. I got interested in, as you know, psychology. Took both a master's and my doctorate in school and community psychology. But the draw for me ended up being community psychology because of the sense of activism, the sense of an opportunity to change more than counseling, which tends to be individually focused.
Yeah.
The opportunity to try to change cultures, subcultures, and communities for the better. So I ended up becoming a public health and a community mental health administrator.
Yeah. Let's ask you to define what community psychiatry is, because that's not an everyday household term.
Well, I think community psychology basically is applying what we know about human behavior,
Mm-hmm.
to the change process involved in functioning in and making efforts to change, improve communities.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my education, for instance, was field work involved in going into a community and looking at what the issues were in that community. For instance, if you have a lot of people who are coming into a mental health clinic and they're suicidal,
Mm-hmm.
well, are there issues in that community that are leading to a higher rate of suicide, suicide risk, suicide attempts? Are we talking about poverty? Are we talking about alcohol or drug addiction? Are we talking about major changes that have occurred?
So contributing factors is what I call
Exactly.
tributaries feeding the mainstream.
Exactly.
I'm going to share with you. I once had a client while working in Dallas. I won't mention his name. He had Crohn's disease, et cetera, living with his mother and all. And he was very hard on himself, Bill. He felt that he goofed up and made a lot of bad decisions in his life. And I wanted him to try to track down what his process of decision making was. So on the white blackboard with magic markers, I drew a river and I had the fork of each of the streams being a major decision in his life. He described, oh, I goofed up here. I went to school here. I shouldn't have done this, blah, blah, blah. And so we reviewed it and said, if you had a second chance and you went upstream in the other direction, stay the way you went, what would your life look like? That was the first part. What I call the alternate script scenario. And the second is, can you see a pattern of what went into your decision making in this point, that point, that point, that sort of follows? In other words, why did you botch it up? And he began to see his own pattern. He would feel impelled and rush to a decision without assimilating all the factors that should go into an intelligent decision. And the pressure of just having to roll out a decision almost like the old mimeograph machine is what it was too abrupt, and he learned he has to slow down and relax a little bit more. And sometimes this advice I used to give, is that you have to buy time and not be forced into a compulsive decision that you have to pay for later on.
Well, that plays out well in our communities, plays out well or not so well in the political arena also. I mean, the process that you described is interesting because, well, let's take for instance, what the county is doing right now through its public safety committee and has been doing in cooperation with the state for the past at least 6 years. It's taking issues like look at our overcrowded prisons and look at the overwhelming number of people with substance abuse, addiction, mental health problems that are in our prisons. They're trying to go back upstream and take a look at things that we could do differently so that 2, 5, 10 years from now, we'll be looking at a situation, hopefully, that's less overcrowding in our correction system and fewer people with addictions and mental health issues ending up being warehoused in the correction system instead of getting the treatment that they need either after they've developed the problem or, under the best of circumstances, getting it earlier in their lives so they don't become victims of their own behavior.
Good point. Bill, when you ran for office, how did your background in psychology feed into your developing position papers, platforms, things that represented you? And the second part of that question is, to what degree do you think that voters judge candidates on issues, and to what degree it's merely on impressions?
How many hours do we have?
Oh, about another 14. I know that's a tricky question. You could write to Bill. You want to give us your email, and you could share.
No, I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay.
I think for me it was more the value system that I had that brought me into the political arena. Interestingly, going back to the activism issue, there was an organization that started back in the 70s, early 80s, called Oregon Fair Share. A lot of people, when they hear that phrase, they think of union, the whole union issue that's being tackled now in union dues. But no, Oregon Fair Share was a community-based activist organization And the essence of it was that a community organizer, maybe a Barack Obama or a Saul Alinsky, would come into a community, and they did come into Grants Pass, which is where I was running the county mental health program and public health. And they would simply try to sit down with community leaders and focus groups and arenas where people gathered naturally, like churches and schools.
Yeah.
And they would just basically throw out very general questions about what would make your community better. You know, what are the things that make you itch in your neighborhood? And then they would work as catalysts to help the citizens organize around those issues. And they would give them...
Populism at its essence.
Absolutely. They would give them advice and support in terms of how to try to positively change your environment. So, of course, it was easy for me over the years to make the translation into the political arena, because politics at its best is organizing people to try and make positive difference.
Upgrades.
And upgrades, positive differences, positive changes in their neighborhood, in their city, in their county, in their state, and, of course, hopefully nationally.
Okay.
We've seen a bit of an abrogation of that process over the past decade or two, but that's the essence of it.
I want to get the footnote on Saul Alinsky. I know who he is, and I think the public, a little vignette, and we're going back 30 or so years when I was in social work school, even the 1970s. Saul Alinsky, operated out of Chicago, he tried to organize people around different viable goals that they had for their neighborhood. It wasn't necessarily citywide, but but including poor, disenfranchised neighborhoods. And from what I remember, Alinsky says, don't start with the big ones. Any new organization, to build up its muscles, has to start in a small scale. So if you need a street light or a stop sign or a crossroads there, or even sidewalks built like we do in Hawthorne, where they have very few sidewalks, and they had a fatal accident a few years ago. Start with a little doable goals. Once you achieve those, then you empower yourself and can get on the bandwagon of people believing in you and your cause because you've done something. Don't go after the pie in the sky, long-range things like public health care will come tomorrow in terms of the single-payer system. That's heavy stuff, and that requires a whole retrofitting of a system in which the status quo people are going to be dislocated, and they're going to fight tooth and nail. And you got to realize that.
One of the things I appreciate about Saul Alinsky, I'm fine, thanks, about Saul Alinsky and some of the folks that model themselves after him, hopefully positively, is the emphasis on individual power.
Yes.
Helping to empower people, and the emphasis, of course, with him working with largely disenfranchised populations in Chicago, minorities, people of low socioeconomic status, people mired in poverty for several generations, was to try and not only give them the success that you talk about, was not only a way of coalescing the neighborhood and helping them to realize that they could have a positive impact, but it was individuals coming to grips with the fact that many of them felt trapped and disempowered. And it was giving those people the opportunity to experience the power of their own power and the success that can come from the utilization of that. And it was interesting because the other night I saw Michael Moore's new film, Where Shall We Invade Next, which is not, despite its title, about war.
Cinema.
It's about taking some of the best of social programs that exist across the world and seeing what lessons we could learn to bring back to our own neighborhood, which is the United States. And some of the finest examples that he gave, women's rights in Tunisia, and the voices of democracy that have arisen some places in the Middle East and in North Africa, had to do with people coming together to recognize that they could be powerful, they could make a change, especially when they were unified. It was a very exciting film to see at this stage in my life because, in essence, you know, Antioch, many generations, decades ago, that was a real emphasis of what we were shown and what we lived as students. And here I am watching Michael Moore demonstrate historically that that still is the essence of bringing about positive change.
I quite agree. Let me show you a little secret. Guess what my major was in social work school?
Community organization.
Exactly, not casework. And I did a lot of that organizing the senior citizens of Rochdale
remember
Village,
that.
Queens, and
Yeah.
a lot of intergenerational programs.
Yep.
I just mentioned one. We had a lot of immigrants, Eastern European and some Caribbean immigrants in the elder community. I was able to get a grant and have,
This was in New York.
in Queens, New York, we hired student journalists from York College of City University and August Martin High School, and they interviewed sequentially about 36 immigrant senior citizens. We called the Ellis Island Digest. We had it in print, and we dedicated it to the Statue of Liberty's 1976 birthday. I think it was 1976.
Yeah.
And all,
Yeah.
And so, and the students really grooved, to use a teenage term, they grooved over the opportunity to get beyond the textbook and interview these older people and find out directly what life was like. One of them was a 98-year-old fellow from, I think, Grenada or Barbados, and he worked on the Panama Canal, actually digging it. They hired a lot of Caribbean folk to do that
That's right.
because they spoke English and all. Teddy Roosevelt was the one behind the Panama Canal. A lot of people don't
My
know that.
grandfather worked on it. He roomed with Teddy Roosevelt's son, Kermit.
Really? Wow.
So a nice little piece of
And there was a
history
Kermit
coming
Roosevelt,
together.
yeah. Oyster Bay was not too far from you. That's where Teddy Roosevelt once lived. Anyway, I want to ask you to describe the dynamics of running a political campaign so people out there who may aspire of running for office or running away from office, that they know some of the trade secrets.
Well, you ask a very important question at a very crucial time.
Yes.
Because my own experience is that you can run for office, you can walk for office, you can saunter for office, you can chat for office, or you can raise a lot of money and advertise
Or you
for
could
office.
jog backwards and be regressive.
But
Some do.
you really have to go back, I think, and look at what motivates people, to run for office. For me, it was simply a logical extension of a life that had been devoted to activism, and recognizing after numerous decades of being involved with leading major social human service programs, the belief that changes could be made, improvements could be made in systems, and that logically our political system, the legislature, is an opportunity to bring about some of those changes, to both listen to people about what's been effective, listen to people about what their needs are, met and unmet, and then try and make a difference at the state level to try and facilitate those changes, hopefully not direct them, but facilitate them.
I get the impression this legislature is much more open, let's say, than the one in California, which has a much bigger population. And that you can access your lawmaker a lot more easily. You could walk in, make an appointment, and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, I again, going back to my Antioch roots, Oregon could not have been a better place for me because I came in 1976 to head up the mental health program in Josephine County. And the very next year, I found myself, testifying, and every legislature session between then and when I left Josephine County in '91, had the opportunity to meet with legislators, to testify before committees. Found myself bragging to all of my friends and colleagues around the country about the openness of the Oregon legislature. Of course, back then I was also very proud of the fact that we were very much more bipartisan than I feel we are now. I think one of the comments I've been reading as we digest what's happened even in this short session is how partisan we've become. And I think that's
It
another
might be because
reason
it's a presidential
that I
year.
ran.
I don't know. The governor will be running. Gordon Friedman from the Statesman Journal wrote re-election. It's actually not a re-election because she moved up to governor when Kitzhaber was forced to leave office. So she's running for her first election.
Right.
Katie Brown, and
Right.
I met her once, a very lowly woman, and all, not an endorsement here, but just positive impression she leaves. I'm going to use the last 2 or 3 minutes to discuss a piece of potential legislation. We were talking before the show. Everybody out there is a health consumer. You go to the doctor. Some of us may wind up going to a hospital. I just returned from a minor surgery, namely prostate surgery. But any kind of surgery or hospital admission entails you signing a contract. You do not know generally if you get the contract on the day of admission, you're all jittery and scared. That is not, in my opinion, what would be called informed consent. You don't know what you're signing. There's small print. You shouldn't just blindly sign away your rights, but you are. Because number one, it says that you are responsible for paying anything that the insurance company does not cover. That locks you up. It's signing a blank check. Number two, and equally as important, is that you are giving away your power to your doctor. Ultimately, it says the doctor shall decide in your name what medical treatment you need. Essentially, you won't be consulted. Your family won't weigh in. You just totally surrendered it all to the doctor as the chief authority figure, unquestioned. And if he does something that you don't like, you can't sue him after the fact because you're giving away your rights. I would like to see that challenge. I would like to see public hearings in the next legislative session on that. And furthermore, I would like to see the admissions contract of any hospital being put online so that people could share it with their families, with their friends, with their lawyers, and read what they're signing and not just be a dummy, as we tend to be in our leading sheep to a slaughter type society.
Well, I think the fortunate thing is that you're presenting this issue in the state of Oregon, and I think we continue to have a model system in terms of its openness, and I think any one of the people, Senate or House, representing this area, anywhere in Marion County, would be very glad to sit down and hear your concern, and I wouldn't be surprised at all but that one or several of them would be delighted to look into sponsoring some legislation, because happily the health system is headed in the direction of additional transparency, both about cost and responsibility.
If you see a candidate running for office for the legislature this session, this year, address the question, what are you doing to make hospital admission transparency a fact? On that note, I will let you dig in and enjoy your meal to go. Bye for now.
Lee.